Today, we have a story that will test your definition of family. Imagine you wake up in the hospital after surviving a massive heart attack and you text your only son for a ride home. And he replies, "Ma, call an Uber. I'm watching the game." This is the story of what happens when a mother's one-sided love finally runs out. First and foremost, I want to give a special shout out to my wonderful and active subscribers. Anna from Florida, Keisha from Texas, and Jessie from Canada. Your support and your comments are a true inspiration. Thank you for being with me. We would love to know from what corners of the world you're watching. Please let us know your city in the comments below. Now, make yourselves comfortable. My name is Martha, and I am 55 years old. The first sharp pain of the heart attack felt like a betrayal. It arrived on a Saturday, a day that had until that moment been perfectly, beautifully ordinary. I was in my garden, the one I had cultivated for 30 years behind our small but proud brick home in a quiet neighborhood of Atlanta. The Georgia sun was warm on my back, and the air was sweet with the scent of late-blooming gardenias. My hands, covered in rich, dark soil, were gently weeding around the base of my tomato plants, which were heavy with fruit. It was my sanctuary, this small patch of earth. It was a place of order, of life, of quiet, predictable growth. The day's only complication, a familiar and low-grade hum of anxiety, was what to make for dinner. My son Jamal and his wife Brenda were supposed to come over. They were always supposed to come over, but their plans were as reliable as a summer thunderstorm, often vanishing with a last-minute text message filled with flimsy excuses. Still, I planned for their arrival, as I always did. I had a beautiful chicken roasting in the oven, its skin crisping to a perfect golden brown. Jamal loved my roasted chicken. It was the taste of his childhood, the taste of a mother's uncomplicated, unconditional love. The first symptom was not the crushing pain of cinematic heart attacks. It was a subtle, strange ache that started in my jaw, a dull throb. I initially dismissed as a dental issue. I stood up from my weeding, brushing the dirt from my knees, and felt a wave of what I thought was indigestion, a hot, acidic feeling in the center of my chest. I made a mental note to take an antacid when I went inside. Then came the fatigue, a sudden, profound, and utterly overwhelming weariness that was completely out of character with the gentle work I had been doing. It felt as if a switch had been flipped inside me, draining all the energy from my body, leaving my limbs feeling heavy as lead. I walked into the cool of my kitchen, my sanctuary of domestic order, and leaned against the counter, waiting for the strange spell to pass. It did not pass. Instead, the fist arrived. It felt like a giant, invisible hand had reached into my chest, grabbed my heart, and begun to squeeze with a brutal, merciless pressure. The pain was excruciating, a crushing, suffocating weight that stole the air from my lungs. It radiated outwards, a terrifying supernova of agony shooting down my left arm and up into my neck. A cold, clammy sweat broke out across my entire body. I knew, with a sudden, absolute, and terrifying certainty, what was happening. My own heart, the organ that had so faithfully and quietly served me for 55 years, was betraying me. It was trying to kill me. The world narrowed to a pinprick of searing pain and frantic, panicked thought. I slid down the kitchen cabinets, my cheek scraping against the cool wood, and collapsed onto the gleaming linoleum floor I had polished just that morning. The phone, my mind screamed. Get to the phone. It was on its charging cradle on the other side of the kitchen, a distance of 15 feet that suddenly felt like a mile-long uphill climb. Every movement was an act of supreme, agonizing effort. I crawled. my body screaming in protest, the polished floor cold against my sweating face. The steady, comforting ticking of the kitchen clock seemed to mock my slow, desperate progress. This is it, I thought, the words a cold, clear bell in the chaos of my mind. I'm going to die here, alone, on my own kitchen floor. The thought was not filled with self-pity, but with a sudden, profound rage. I was not ready. I had so much more life to live, so much more love to give. I would not die like this. With a final, desperate surge of will, I reached the phone, my fingers, clumsy and tingling, fumbled with the keypad slipping on the screen. 911. I managed to press the numbers, my thumb hitting the green call button, just as a fresh wave of pain crashed over me, pulling me down into a dark, roaring tunnel. I remember a calm female voice on the other end of the line asking for my address. I remember gasping out the street name, and then I remember nothing at all. The second betrayal was waking up. The transition from the black, silent void back to the world of the living was not gentle. It was a jarring, confusing cacophony of sensation. The first thing I registered was the smell. A sharp, sterile, chemical scent of antiseptic that was the opposite of my garden. The second was the sound. A steady, rhythmic, and unnervingly loud beeping that seemed to be coming from somewhere just beside my head. I forced my heavy eyelids open. The world was a blurry, white landscape, a ceiling, an IV pole, a tangle of wires. A nurse with a kind, tired face appeared in my field of vision. "Welcome back, Martha," she said, her voice soft. "You gave us quite a scare. You're in the cardiac ICU at Grady Memorial. You had a very serious heart attack. Dr. Evans performed an emergency quadruple bypass. You're very, very lucky." Lucky? The word seemed absurd. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from a tube, and all that came out was a dry, rasping croak. But I had only one question, a question that was more important than my own survival. It was a question my heart, my real, emotional heart, needed an answer to. I looked at the nurse, my eyes pleading. "Where are they?" I tried to ask. "Where is my son? Where is my family?" The nurse just gave me a sad, compassionate smile, patted my hand, and told me to rest. But as I looked around the empty, sterile, and silent hospital room, I began to understand. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only company I had. I was completely and utterly alone. The 2 weeks I spent in that hospital room were a masterclass in the anatomy of silence. The first few days were a blur of pain, medication, and the disorienting fog of post-operative recovery. I was a vessel of tubes and wires, my body a territory that no longer belonged to me, but to the efficient, compassionate strangers in scrubs who monitored my every heartbeat and measured my every breath. In the hazy moments of semi-consciousness, my mind, a scared and wounded animal, would retreat to a single desperate thought: Jamal. Surely he was on his way. Surely he was just outside the door, waiting for the doctors to let him in. They had his number. He was my emergency contact. The delay, I told myself, was a matter of hospital protocol, not of filial neglect. The first hard crack in this carefully constructed denial came on the third day. I was finally lucid enough to speak, my voice a raw, scratchy whisper. My nurse, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Gloria with warm, weary eyes, was checking my IV drip. "My son," I rasped, the words a painful effort. Were you able to reach my son Jamal?" Gloria's professional smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. She busied herself with the IV pole, her gaze averted. "We contacted him the day you were admitted, Martha," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too gentle. We spoke to his wife, Brenda, as well. They know you're here. I'm sure they're just very busy and will be here as soon as they can. Her kindness was a shield meant to protect me from a truth that was suddenly, glaringly obvious. They knew. They had known for 3 days that I had suffered a massive, life-threatening heart attack, that I had undergone emergency open-heart surgery, and that I was lying alone in this hospital bed. And they had chosen not to come. The knowledge was a second, quieter, but no less brutal heart attack. After that, the days began to stretch into a monotonous gray expanse, each one a carbon copy of the last. I was moved from the intensive care unit to a private recovery room. The constant urgent beeping of the ICU was replaced by a different kind of sound. The profound, echoing silence of my own solitude. The routine of the hospital became the only structure of my days. The 6 a.m. blood draws, the bland, lukewarm meals served on plastic trays, the endless, mindless chatter of daytime television, and the long, dark, sleepless nights. Through it all, my phone sat on the bedside table, a silent, black monolith of their indifference. It was my tormentor. Every time a nurse bustled into the room, my heart would leap with a foolish Pavlovian hope. Maybe it's him. Maybe he's finally here. But it was never him. I continued to make excuses for them in the quiet, desperate courtroom of my own mind. He's scared of hospitals. Brenda is probably so overwhelmed she doesn't know what to do. He doesn't want to see me looking so weak and frail. The excuses grew thinner and more pathetic with each passing silent day. I would watch other patients in the ward, their rooms filled with the cheerful clutter of flowers, balloons, and the constant, loving presence of their families. And then I would look at my own bare room, at the single wilting bouquet the hospital volunteers had brought me, and the cold, hard truth would settle in my bones. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a product of fear or chaos. This was a choice. My son and his wife had looked at my life or death crisis and had consciously, deliberately chosen to be absent. I was a problem they had decided not to have. On the 14th day, my surgeon, Dr. Evans, entered my room with a wide, proud smile. "Your new heart is as strong as an ox, Martha," she announced, looking at my chart. "You've recovered remarkably well. I see no reason to keep you here any longer. You're ready to go home tomorrow." The words should have filled me with a pure, unadulterated joy. Instead, they were accompanied by a fresh wave of anxiety. Home? How would I get home? Who would take care of me? The questions were practical, but the fear was existential. I was being released from the hospital's care, and I was terrified to discover there was no other care waiting for me. But then that stubborn, foolish mother's heart, the one the surgeons had so skillfully repaired, gave one last desperate flicker of hope. "Maybe they were just waiting," it whispered. "Maybe they didn't want to bother me while I was recovering. Maybe now that I'm being discharged, they will finally show up." Clinging to this last flimsy thread, I picked up my phone. My fingers, still clumsy from weeks of inactivity, felt strange as they moved across the glass screen. I opened the family group chat, a digital space that had been silent for 2 weeks. I carefully, painstakingly typed out a message, editing it over and over to make sure it sounded as cheerful, as breezy, and as non-demanding as possible. I was a 55-year-old woman who had just survived a quadruple bypass, and I was still managing my son's feelings. "Good news," I finally wrote, adding a smiling emoji that felt like a scream. "The doctor says I'm being discharged tomorrow morning. Would anyone be able to pick me up around 10 a.m.? I hit the send button, the small whoosh of the message leaving my phone sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room, and then I waited. My eyes fixed on the screen, my newly mended heart pounding a frantic, hopeful, and utterly stupid rhythm against my ribs, waiting for the loving, relieved response that I knew I needed, but which I was about to discover I would not receive. I stared at the screen of my phone, my entire world held in suspended animation, waiting for the digital verdict on my own relevance. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. And then the 3 small pulsing dots appeared next to my son's name. He was typing. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over me, so potent it was almost dizzying. He's answering, I thought. He cares. It was all a misunderstanding. I pictured his reply. A flurry of apologies. An excuse about a missed call, a promise that he was on his way right now. I braced myself for the healing balm of his love. The message bubble appeared. It was short, terse, 6 words that would detonate the entire foundation of my life. Ma, call an Uber, I'm watching the game. I read the words once, then again. And again. My mind refused to process them. They were a string of nonsensical symbols, a message in a language I did not understand. A game. He was watching a game. I, his mother, had been sliced open. My heart literally stopped and restarted. I had spent 2 weeks in a sterile purgatory, hovering between life and death, and my son could not be bothered to drive 20 minutes to bring me home, because he was watching a group of men he did not know chase a ball across a field. The casual, almost bored cruelty of it was a more profound and painful blow than the heart attack itself. The fist that had squeezed my heart 2 weeks ago had been a random biological event. This was a deliberate act of contempt. The word ma was a particular cruelty, a lazy, dismissive shorthand for the woman who had spent 30 years of her life dedicated to his every need. The suggestion to call an Uber, a transactional solution to a deeply human crisis, was his way of saying, you are a logistical problem to be solved, not a mother to be cared for. As I sat there, the phone still held in my trembling hand, my mind a wasteland of shock and grief, the screen lit up again. A new message. This one was from Brenda, my daughter-in-law. Perhaps I thought with a final dying flicker of foolish hope she would be the voice of reason. Perhaps she would apologize for his callousness. Her message was even shorter than my son's. And it was infinitely more cruel. Honestly, you should have stayed another month. It's so peaceful without you. If Jamal's text had been a thoughtless act of selfish indifference, Brenda's was a deliberate, vicious twist of the knife. It was a confirmation. My absence from my own home was not a source of worry or concern for them. It was a relief, a vacation. My struggle for survival had been an inconvenience, and my potential death would have been, it seemed, a welcome respite. The last of my maternal excuses, the flimsy justifications I had been constructing for 2 weeks, all turned to dust. There was no misunderstanding. This was not a product of fear or chaos. This was the unvarnished, ugly truth of their hearts. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the 2 message bubbles on my screen. They were like a pair of gravestones, marking the official death of a love I had foolishly believed was unconditional. Eventually, a soft knock at the door brought me back to the world. It was my nurse, Gloria, her face warm and cheerful. "Ready to go home, Martha?" she asked, holding my discharge papers. "Is your family on the way up?" The shame that washed over me was so intense it felt like a physical fever. I could not bring myself to tell this kind, compassionate stranger the truth, to admit that my own son had told me to call a cab. "They got held up in some terrible traffic," I lied, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. I'll just call an Uber myself. It's no trouble. Gloria's professional smile faltered for a moment, and in her eyes I saw a deep, sad understanding. She had seen this story before. Of course, dear, she said softly. Let me help you get your things together. The process of leaving was a blur of quiet humiliation. Getting dressed in the clothes that had sat in a plastic bag for 2 weeks, clothes that now seemed to belong to a different woman, a more naive and hopeful one. The slow, final walk down the long antiseptic hallway, Gloria pushing my wheelchair. She wheeled me to the hospital's main entrance, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft whoosh, and for the first time in 2 weeks I was hit with the warm, humid air of the outside world. Gloria helped me to a bench to wait for my ride. You take care of yourself, Martha, she said, squeezing my hand. You call us if you need anything at all. I watched her walk back into the hospital. This stranger who had shown me more genuine care in 2 weeks than my own family had. The Uber ride home was a journey through a city that was suddenly alien to me. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of Atlanta, at the parks where I had pushed Jamal on the swings, at the storefronts and the bustling sidewalks, and I felt a profound and terrifying sense of dislocation. I was a ghost, a tourist in a life I thought was my own. The woman who had lived in this city, the woman who had raised a son in that brick house we were now approaching, the woman who had believed in the fierce, unbreakable bonds of family, that woman had died on the operating table. A new, unknown woman, a woman with a mended heart and a shattered soul, was the one who was coming home. The Uber pulled up to the curb in front of my house, the small brick bungalow that I had called home for over 30 years. From the outside, everything looked exactly as I had left it. My prize-winning roses were blooming along the walkway, a riot of cheerful pink and defiant red. The lawn was a little overgrown, but otherwise the house stood as it always had, a quiet, respectable symbol of a life of order and care. A treacherous, foolish part of me hoped that the ugliness of the text messages was a strange aberration, a momentary lapse in an otherwise loving family. I hoped that I would open the door to a clean, quiet house, perhaps with a note on the table from a son who had finally come to his senses. The Uber driver, a kind young man, helped me with my small hospital bag and wished me well. I made the long, slow walk up my own driveway, my body still weak and tender from the surgery, my incision site a dull, throbbing ache with every step. I fumbled with my keys, my hands unsteady. The familiar act of putting the key in the lock of my own front door felt strange, illicit, as if I were a burglar breaking into someone else's life. I turned the key, pushed the door open, and the lie I had been telling myself was instantly, brutally annihilated. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was not the familiar, comforting scent of my home, a subtle blend of lemon polish, old books, and whatever was baking in the oven. It was the stale, sour smell of a frat house after a long weekend, a mixture of old pizza, stale beer, and a general, greasy odor of profound neglect. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hospital bag slipping from my numb fingers. The house I had left 2 weeks ago, a sanctuary of gleaming floors and spotless surfaces, was gone. In its place was a scene of utter, disrespectful chaos. The living room, my beautiful living room with its carefully arranged family photos and the armchair where I read to my grandchildren, was a disaster zone. Empty liquor bottles and beer cans sweat rings onto the polished wood of my grandmother's antique coffee table. Greasy pizza boxes were stacked in a corner like a leaning tower of filth. Video game controllers and magazines were strewn across the floor, and a pile of dirty clothes was casually thrown over the back of my favorite armchair. With a growing sense of horror, I walked into the kitchen. It was worse. The sink was overflowing with a mountain of dirty dishes, some of them already sprouting the first, faint blooms of green and gray mold. The countertops, which I wiped down a dozen times a day, were sticky with spilled soda and littered with crumbs. The trash can was overflowing, a cascade of garbage spilling onto the floor I had scrubbed on my hands and knees just 2 weeks ago. This was not just a mess. A mess is a byproduct of a busy, happy life. This was a statement. This was the physical manifestation of their text messages, a testament to the peace they felt in my absence. They hadn't just failed to maintain the home, they had actively desecrated it. They had treated my sanctuary, the physical embodiment of my life's work and love, as their personal playground, their clubhouse, their garbage dump. They hadn't just been living in my house. They had been reveling in my absence, celebrating the removal of the one person whose presence had demanded a basic level of respect and order. With a cold, heavy dread in the pit of my stomach, I made my way down the hall to the one room that was more mine than any other, my small office. It was my sanctuary within the sanctuary, the place I kept my books, my correspondence, my photo albums, the quiet, orderly command center of my life. I pushed the door open, and it was there that I found the final, most personal, and most unforgivable violation. The room had been turned into a chaotic, overflowing storage closet for their junk. An old, dusty exercise bike Brenda hadn't used in years was shoved in a corner. Stacks of Jamal's old college textbooks and magazines were piled on the floor. Boxes of Brenda's winter clothes, things she clearly didn't have space for in her own apartment, were blocking the window. My desk, my personal sacred space, was invisible under a mountain of their clutter. Unopened mail, a broken lamp, a collection of empty Amazon boxes, and lying face down on a stack of junk mail as if it had been casually tossed aside was the silver-framed photograph of my late husband that had sat on my desk for 10 years. I stood there, in the doorway of my ruined office, and I felt the last vestiges of the heartbroken, grieving mother I had been in the hospital simply evaporate. The pain was gone. The sadness was gone. The foolish, stubborn hope that my son was still, somewhere deep down, the little boy I had raised, was extinguished forever. In their place was a clarity so cold, so pure, and so absolute, it was almost peaceful. I was not angry. I was simply done. They hadn't just abandoned me in the hospital. They hadn't just disrespected my home. They had, with a profound and casual contempt, erased me from my own life while I was fighting to save it. The one-sided love I had poured into my son for 30 years, a love that had been met with a lifetime of selfish indifference, had finally, blessedly, run out. The woman they had abandoned in the hospital was dead. A new woman, a woman with a mended heart and a spine of pure, unbending steel, was home. And she was about to take back her life. That first night, I did not sleep in my own bed. The thought of lying in the master bedroom, a space I had shared with my late husband for 30 years, while the rest of the house reeked of my son's disrespect, was unbearable. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene, and I refused to be a resident of its violation. After standing in the doorway of my desecrated office, after the last of my maternal illusions had been burned away by the cold, hard truth, I acted with a clarity and a purpose I had not felt in years. I walked to the kitchen, stepping over a discarded pizza box, and picked up the phone. I did not call a friend for a tearful recounting of the day's events. I did not call a cleaning service. I called the downtown Marriott and booked a room for 1 week. Then, I went to my bedroom, retrieved a small, clean suitcase from the top of the closet, and packed. I did not pack with the frantic, haphazard energy of a woman fleeing a crisis. I packed with the methodical calm of a person preparing for a long overdue business trip. I selected a few simple, elegant outfits, my toiletries, and the book I had been trying to read in the hospital. I also packed a large, leather-bound portfolio from my desk, the one containing all of our important family documents, the deed to the house, my current will, our insurance policies, and my pension statements. As I walked through the trashed living room towards the front door, I paused. On the coffee table, amidst the empty bottles and discarded magazines, was a single framed photograph that had been knocked over. It was a picture of Jamal, around age 10, proudly holding up a string of fish on a family vacation. For a moment, a wave of profound, aching grief washed over me, a mourning for the sweet, loving boy who had somehow grown into the callous, selfish man who had abandoned his mother in her darkest hour. I looked at that photo, at the ghost of the son I had lost, and I made a decision. I left it there, face down, amidst the wreckage he had co-created. I would not be taking any ghosts with me on this new journey. I walked out, locking the door on the mess, on the memories, on the entire life that was no longer mine. The next morning, I was not in a hotel robe, ordering room service. I was dressed in a sharp professional suit, sitting in the quiet wood-paneled office of my lawyer. David Chen was an old friend, a man who had handled my late husband's estate and had been a pillar of support for me in the years since his passing. He was a kind, gentle man, but also a brilliant and incisive attorney. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses, his face a mask of deep concern. "Martha," he said, his voice soft. "Your message last night was alarming. Are you all right? What on earth has happened?" I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I simply and calmly laid out the facts of the case as if I were a client presenting a briefing. I told him about the heart attack, about the surgery, about the 2 weeks of absolute, deafening silence from my son and daughter-in-law. I told him about the cruel, dismissive text messages, and I described in dispassionate detail the state of the house I had returned to. I was not a woman seeking sympathy. I was a woman building a case. When I finished, David was silent for a long moment, a look of profound, angry disbelief on his face. "My God, Martha," he finally whispered, shaking his head. "I'm so sorry." He leaned forward, his expression shifting from one of sympathy to one of legal strategy. "So, what do you want to do? We can explore options for having them legally removed from the property. We can file for damages." "I want to change my will, David," I interrupted, my voice clear and firm. "Immediately. I want to write them out. Completely." He looked taken aback. "Martha, are you sure? This is a very big, very final step. Perhaps we should give them a chance to explain, to apologize." "An apology is not a consequence, David," I said, and the words came from a place of newfound strength I didn't know I possessed. I spent my entire life building that home, raising that boy, pouring my love and my resources into him. In my moment of greatest need, they treated me as less than a stranger. They treated my home as a garbage dump. This is not about anger. This is about consequences. It is about the fundamental truth that my life's work, my legacy, and the fruits of my husband's labor will not be handed as a prize to people who hold it, and me, in such utter and complete contempt. I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. He recognized the unshakable resolve in my voice. "All right, Martha," he said with a decisive nod. "What do you want to do with the estate?" "I want it all to go to a charity," I said. "Specifically, I want to donate the house, my savings, my pension, everything, to the Atlanta Women's Housing Initiative." David's eyebrows shot up. It was a well-known and highly respected local foundation that provided housing and support for single mothers and their children. "That's an incredibly generous gesture, Martha," he said, a new note of admiration in his voice. "It's a logical one," I replied. "I want the legacy my husband and I built to mean something. I want that house, the one I filled with love, to raise my own child, to be a sanctuary for other women who are struggling to do the same, women who might actually appreciate the gift of a safe and loving home. I will not allow it to be inherited by a son who has forgotten the very meaning of the words." My instructions were absolute, my resolve unshakable. David, recognizing the profound and righteous certainty of my decision, began to draft the new documents immediately. The process took several hours, a quiet, methodical dismantling of one future and the construction of another. When the final document was ready, I picked up the heavy, expensive pen he offered me. I looked at the line where my name was to be written, the line that would formally and forever sever my son from the legacy he believed was his birthright. There was no hesitation, there was no regret, there was only a profound and liberating sense of peace. I signed my name, my hand as steady as a surgeon's, and with that single fluid stroke of ink, I took my life back. After signing the new will, I felt a strange and profound sense of lightness, as if a physical weight I had been carrying for my entire adult life had been lifted from my shoulders. The act was done. The legal framework of my old life, a structure built on the assumption of a loving, reciprocal family bond, had been demolished and replaced with a new one, built on the hard, clear-eyed foundation of the truth. My lawyer, David Chen, looked at me with a mixture of professional admiration and personal concern. "So, what happens now, Martha?" he asked gently. "According to the law, I am required to send a formal notification of the changes to the will to all affected parties. That means Jamal." I shook my head. The thought of a dry legal letter arriving at the house, a letter they could ignore, twist, or use to paint me as a villain in their own private narrative, was not enough. For years, my suffering had been invisible, my contributions taken for granted, my very presence in my own home rendered transparent. Their betrayal was not just a private matter, it was a fundamental erasure of my personhood. And I had decided, in the cold, clear light of my hotel room the night before, that my response would not be a quiet, private legal maneuver. My response would be just as visible as their disrespect had been. "No, David," I said, my voice firm with a purpose that surprised even myself. "A letter is not enough. A letter they can tear up. A letter allows them to control the story. For my entire life, they have controlled the story. Now it's my turn." He looked at me, confused. "What do you have in mind?" "I have a friend from my old book club," I explained. "She's a producer for the evening news at the local Channel 2 station. I'm going to offer her an exclusive, a human interest story, a story about second chances, philanthropy, and the importance of community." My decision was not about public revenge. It was about reclaiming my own narrative in a public square, making my existence and my choices undeniably real. It was about making myself a woman they had treated as invisible, impossible to ignore. The television studio a week later was a strange alien landscape of bright, hot lights, thick black cables, and the quiet, focused intensity of a team of professionals at work. They treated me with a gentle, solicitous respect. A makeup artist dabbing powder on my nose, a sound technician carefully clipping a small microphone to my blouse. The contrast between this professional deference and the casual contempt of my own family was a dizzying, painful irony. I was interviewed by a well-known local news anchor, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, whose kind, intelligent face I had seen on my television for years. She sat opposite me, her expression one of deep, compassionate interest. Beside me sat the director of the Atlanta Women's Housing Initiative, a formidable and inspiring woman named Dr. Alicia Freeman. Sarah began the interview gently, asking me about my life, my late husband, my home. Then she guided me to the heart of the matter. "Martha," she said, her voice soft, "you recently had a very serious health scare. Can you tell us about that?" I took a deep breath, the camera's red light a single unblinking eye, and I told the truth. I spoke of the heart attack, the surgery, the 2 weeks I had spent alone in the hospital, waiting for a call that never came. I did not fill my story with anger or self-pity. I spoke with a quiet, factual dignity, and then I took out my phone. "On the day of my discharge," I said, my voice steady, "I texted my son to ask for a ride home." This was his reply. I read his 6 brutal words aloud for the entire city of Atlanta to hear. "Ma, call an Uber. I'm watching the game." I then read Brenda's reply. "Honestly, you should have stayed another month. It's so peaceful without you." A wave of shocked silence washed over the television studio. I had not told the producer about the text messages beforehand. Sarah Jenkins's professional composure momentarily cracked, her eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "That experience," I continued, my voice unwavering, "gave me a new and profound sense of clarity. I realized that the home I had spent my life building was meant to be a sanctuary of love and support. And since my own family no longer seemed to value that, I decided to give that gift to people who would." I turned to Dr. Freeman. "That is why I have made the decision to donate my entire estate, my house, my savings, my pension, to the Atlanta Women's Housing Initiative, to help other women, single mothers, create the safe, loving homes for their children that every family deserves." That evening, I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, a simple dinner on the table, and I watched myself on the 6 o'clock news. I saw the woman on the screen, calm, smiling, and dignified, and for the first time I felt a sense of profound pride in her. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. The story ended. The broadcast cut to a commercial for a local car dealership. And then my phone, which had been so painfully, stubbornly silent for weeks, began to scream. It lit up with an incoming call from Jamal. I ignored it. Before the ringing even stopped, it began to ring again. Jamal. Then a text message appeared, then another, then a call from Brenda, then another from Jamal. It was a frantic, relentless digital assault. For the next hour, my phone did not stop buzzing, a furious, angry hornet in the quiet of my room, a testament to their panicked, greedy rage. I did not answer. I did not read the texts. I simply watched the screen light up with their names over and over again. I counted the missed calls. 10, 20, 45, 67, 67 missed calls from the son who couldn't be bothered to make one. I finally picked up the phone, but only to press the silence button. I placed it face down on the nightstand and turned my attention back to my book. The storm was raging outside, but in my small, quiet room, I was finally, truly, at peace. The morning after the broadcast, I woke up in the crisp, anonymous sheets of my hotel bed and felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost disorienting. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I had slept through the entire night, a deep, dreamless, and untroubled sleep. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been the background music to my life for decades was gone. In its place, there was only a clean, quiet, and beautiful silence. I was the master of my own morning. I ordered coffee from room service, another small, decadent act of self-care. It was while I was sitting by the window watching the Atlanta skyline emerge from the morning mist that I finally picked up my phone. It was a digital crime scene. The screen was a chaotic tapestry of notifications. 67 missed calls from Jamal and Brenda. 28 new text messages. 14 new voicemails. It was the frantic, desperate barrage of communication I had spent 2 weeks in the hospital praying for, but it had arrived far too late, and for all the wrong reasons. Curiosity, a cold and clinical instinct, compelled me to listen to a few of the voicemails. They were a fascinating, almost textbook study in the stages of narcissistic rage. The first message from Jamal, left just minutes after the news broadcast, was full of sputtering, indignant fury. "Mom, what the hell was that? What have you done? You need to call me right now. You can't do this. It's our house." The next one, from an hour later, had shifted to panicked threats. "I've spoken to a lawyer, Mom. You have no legal right to do this. We live here. We have rights. You have completely lost your mind, and we will see you in court." The final one, left sometime in the desperate early hours of the morning, was the most revealing of all. The anger was gone, replaced by a cracking, pleading whine that was the voice of a terrified little boy who had just had his favorite toy taken away. "Mom, please pick up the phone," he begged, his voice thick with a self-pity that masqueraded as remorse. "Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't pick you up from the hospital. Is that what this is about? It was a stupid mistake. I was busy. Please don't throw our family away over a stupid Uber. We can fix this. Just call me." I listened to his words, and I felt nothing. There was no flicker of maternal pity, no urge to soothe his self-inflicted pain. His apology wasn't for the 2 weeks of cruel abandonment. It wasn't for the desecration of my home. It was for getting caught. He wasn't sorry for the crime. He was sorry for the consequences. With a calm, deliberate motion, I selected all the messages, all the texts, all the call logs, and I deleted them all without listening to another word. Their noise no longer had a place in my quiet new world. I let them stew in their panic for one more day. It was not an act of kindness. It was a final, strategic courtesy that served my own purposes. It gave them a full 24 hours to fully comprehend the consequences of their actions, to understand that this was not a negotiation. And it gave me the time I needed to execute the final phase of my plan. I spent the day on the phone, not with them, but with the people who would help me dismantle my old life and build my new one. I called a moving company and arranged for them to meet me at the house the next morning. I called a locksmith and scheduled a time for every lock on the property to be changed. My final call was to Dr. Freeman, the director of the Women's Housing Initiative. I informed her of my plans, And she, in turn, informed me that the foundation's legal team was already in the process of formally accepting my donation and would be taking over all legal and financial responsibility for the property by the end of the week. The next morning, I knew from a brief, factual text from my next-door neighbor that Jamal's and Brenda's cars were gone. They had likely gone to see a lawyer of their own, a futile attempt to undo the unbreakable legal fortress I had constructed. This was my window. I met the movers and the locksmith at the house. Walking back through the front door felt different this time. I was not a victim returning to a scene of desecration. I was an executor, a calm, dispassionate agent of a will that was now my own. The house was still a disaster, a testament to their selfishness and sloth, but I did not see the mess. I saw only the tasks that needed to be done. I directed the movers with a quiet, efficient authority. I did not ask them to pack up my son's and daughter-in-law's belongings. That felt too intimate, a final act of maternal service I was no longer willing to perform. Instead, I instructed them to professionally and quickly box up every single item in the living room and the master bedroom, their clothes, their video games, their collection of liquor bottles, their junk, everything. My own cherished personal items from my office and the guest room, my books, my photos, my late husband's records, were packed separately to be taken to a climate-controlled storage unit. Within 2 hours, the job was done. The movers placed 24 neatly packed and labeled boxes on the front porch. It was their entire shared life, reduced to a pile of cardboard on the steps of a house that was no longer theirs. As the moving truck pulled away, the locksmith finished his work. He handed me a single new gleaming silver key. I held it in my palm for a moment, and then I walked to the car where Dr. Freeman, a silent, supportive witness to this quiet coup, was waiting. I handed her the key. "It's yours now," I said. "Do good with it." She took the key, her eyes shining with a profound, grateful understanding. As we drove away, I did not look back. I did not need to. I was not leaving a home. I was leaving a house, an empty brick shell that no longer held any part of my heart. My new life began in a small, bright apartment on the 12th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta. The space was a perfect cube of light and air, with a wall of windows that looked out over the sprawling, energetic cityscape. It was the complete and total opposite of the house I had left behind. The house in the suburbs had been a place of shadows, of quiet, accumulated history, of rooms that were weighted down with the ghosts of who I used to be. This apartment was a blank canvas. It had no history. It had no ghosts. It had only a future, and for the first time in my life, that future was entirely mine to paint. The process of settling in was a quiet, joyful act of self-discovery. I did not try to replicate my old life. I consciously and deliberately created a new one. I sold the heavy, dark, traditional furniture that had come with my marriage, pieces chosen by my mother-in-law and tolerated by me. In its place, I bought a comfortable, modern sofa in a cheerful shade of teal, a sleek glass coffee table, and a plush, ridiculously comfortable armchair that I placed in the sunniest corner of the living room, designated as my new reading nook. I filled the space with things that brought me joy. Shelves of books I had always meant to read, vibrant, abstract art by local artists, and more green, leafy plants than any one woman could possibly need. This was not a family home designed for the comfort and convenience of others. This was my home, a space that was a direct and unapologetic reflection of me. About a month after I had moved in, I had one final unexpected encounter with my old life. I was walking downtown, on my way to the public library when I saw them across the street, Jamal and Brenda. They were standing on a corner, and they were arguing. I could not hear their words, but their body language spoke volumes. Brenda's face was a mask of furious, resentful frustration. Jamal looked haggard, stressed, and utterly defeated. The arrogant, carefree boy I had raised, and the sharp, entitled woman who had shared his life were gone. In their place were two bitter, unhappy people untethered from the comfortable, subsidized life they had so carelessly thrown away, now adrift in the harsh, unforgiving reality of the consequences they had created. They did not see me. I was just another anonymous face in the bustling midday crowd. I watched them for a moment, and I felt not a flicker of anger, not a single satisfying spark of vengeful triumph. I felt only a profound and distant sense of pity, the kind of pity you would feel for strangers you see fighting on a bus. They were no longer my problem. Their anger, their unhappiness, their chaos, it could no longer touch me. I turned and continued my walk to the library, leaving them behind on that street corner, two ghosts in a life that was no longer mine. My days now have a new and beautiful rhythm, one that is dictated not by the needs of others, but by my own passions and curiosities. 3 days a week, I volunteer at the Atlanta Women's Housing Initiative. I don't sit on the board or manage the finances. I work in the office of the first new building they were able to acquire with the funds from my donation. That building, of course, is my old house. I helped them convert it from a single-family home into 3 beautiful, spacious apartments for single mothers and their children. To see the lights on in the windows, to hear the sound of children's laughter in the yard I used to tend, to know that my legacy is not one of inherited bitterness, but of newly created hope, that is a satisfaction more profound than any I have ever known. The rest of my time is my own. I have joined a book club. I am taking a pottery class at a local art center. My hands finally in the clay I've always longed to work with. I explore the city. I visit museums. I sit in cafes for hours, reading and watching the world go by, utterly and completely at peace in my own company. They lost far more than a house. They lost a mother, a safety net, a lifetime of unconditional love they had mistaken for an entitlement. And I lost the crushing, soul-destroying weight of that one-sided love. I lost the burden of their expectations. I lost the ghost life I had been living for 35 years. In the end, the exchange felt more than fair. Tonight, I am sitting on the small balcony of my apartment, a glass of wine in my hand, the lights of the city spread out before me like a carpet of scattered diamonds. The air is cool and clean. I can hear the distant melodic sound of a saxophone being played by a street musician somewhere below. It is a beautiful, peaceful, and wonderfully solitary evening. I place my free hand over my chest, over the faint silver scar that is the roadmap of my second chance. Beneath it, I can feel the steady, strong, and rhythmic beat of my newly mended heart. For 55 years, it had beaten for others, for a husband, for a son, for the endless, hungry needs of a family. But tonight, in the quiet of my new life, it beats a different rhythm. It is a slow and steady and powerful beat. And for the very first time, it is beating only for me.